Hello everyone, I'm Tori.
And I'm Kariana.
And welcome to God in All Things. Today we are getting started on a series that I'm so excited that we're getting started on. It is The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, of course starting with The Hobbit, the standalone that is The Hobbit. So let's just kick off with the summary right away and then we'll get into our personal experiences with it. So, with Tolkien's The Hobbit, we enter the world of Middle-earth for the first time. Bilbo Baggins is a perfectly respectable hobbit. However, the Took side of him, inherited from his mother, takes over when a wizard and a group of dwarves arrive, requesting his aid in an adventure. Now he will have to battle trolls, goblins, spiders, and more, not to mention a dragon, in order to get there and back again, which is the other tale for The Hobbit, if you don't know. And that is where we're going to go with this discussion today, is through that journey. So personal experiences. My very first experience with The Hobbit was actually my dad read it to me when I was maybe like 11.
Cute.
He would read a lot of different series to me and my brothers. And of course I loved it. It was a huge reason why I've grown up to love reading so much, was him reading to us. And he chose to do The Hobbit kind of towards the tail end of when he was doing it, like when I was kind of reaching teenagerhood, so like I wasn't as interested, or I was getting more busy, and so I wasn't able to engage in that as much, so it didn't happen as regularly as it used to. But he decided to read The Hobbit to us, and I actually hated it. I really found it so boring. I was like, I don't get it, Dad, whatever, if you like this book. I just had no interest in it. It was whatever. I did grow up watching the Lord of the Rings films, so like I knew the Lord of the Rings. It wasn't like this was my first introduction into Middle Earth as a world, or Lord of the Rings as a series, but I just did not like this book. I was like, hey, well, whatever. And then when the films came out, I remember going to see them and enjoying them quite a bit. I could tell there were changes made, but it had been so long that I didn't really remember anything from the original source work, and so yeah, I just enjoyed myself with them, and that was fine. And then I decided, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, I actually listened to the audiobooks for the whole Lord of the Rings series and then The Hobbit. And I gotta say, I liked it a lot better. I will say that. I liked it a lot better. I really love Tolkien's writing style. I love Bilbo so much. He's one of my favorite Middle-earth characters. I just love him. But I still think it's my least favorite. If we're going through like all of the, I know Lord of the Rings is technically one book, but if you're splitting them up into the 3 and include this on a ranking, I would put this one at the bottom. I still think there's some aspects to it that just aren't as engaging to me for some reason. Not really sure why, but like I said, I do love Bilbo. Like, I just adore him, so he's really a saving grace in this book. But like I said, I do also enjoy it a lot more than I did when I was younger. I find it engaging and sweet, and yeah, it's a fun world that J.R.R. Tolkien creates, and it's fun getting introduced to it in this one. So that's all I really have to say about it. What about you?
I don't know how surprising this will be, but I've never read this book before.
Really? That is actually very
time.
Surprising.
Yes. For all the viewers who don't know, I actually in college took a Lord of the Rings class.
Yes.
So I studied the Lord of the Rings book, whatever, yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna refer to it as books.
Yes.
I know.
I think we both will. Sorry everybody, yes. Who cares?
And movies. It was Lord of the Rings and book and film. But we didn't read The Hobbit, and I had never read it before, and I never read it after, and so this was my first time reading The Hobbit.
You had, all right.
Yeah. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's definitely, it's definitely very childish, mm-hmm. but like in the best way possible.
Yes.
Like, there was one part that I don't think I actually marked it. I marked it in my head, and I will go back and mark it. Okay. Where I won't read it, but I was just actually astounded. I was like, how did he just create like the most beautifully written sentence with the most like whimsical childlike feeling ever? Like, and you have this man who is a literal master of English. Yes. The dude wrote half the Oxford English Dictionary. Like, he knows everything there is to know about English. He just understands
language, yeah.
And he uses it to say things like miserabler.
Yes.
You know? Like, he just... epitomizes knowing the rules so that you can break them. And he uses the rules to create such beautiful, whimsical, childlike, charming, magical writing.
Right, yeah.
And so I would have to agree with you. I still enjoy The Lord of the Rings more than this because I simply prefer more in-depth and darker and and adult stories. But like, I want to give this so much praise to emphasize the fact that I adore J.R.R. Tolkien's writing abilities. He's just
amen.
Oh my gosh. I don't know. Have you read The Silmarillion?
I haven't read it. I want to, but I'm so intimidated.
I listened to The Silmarillion during that Lord of the Rings class.
You listened to it?
And that is at the bottom.
I was going to say, I started listening to it and I was like, I think I need to physically read this. I think if I listen to this, I'm gonna be so confused and bored at the same time.
It was the most boring thing I've ever listened to.
I feel like if I read it physically, I can pick up on the language nuances better.
That's probably what I need to do.
Things like that. Yeah. We'll just read that together too.
Yeah,
maybe not for a podcast episode, but we'll do it just as a friend thing, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, that's the opposite side. This is so whimsical and childish, and The Lord of the Rings is just like beautiful and magical and perfect, and The Silmarillion is like the Bible, except not the Bible.
Except not true. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair. Okay.
Anyway, there it is. There's my admission. I don't know if I've actually ever told anyone out loud.
Yes. I feel like you did at one point mention it to me.
Okay.
And I think I just kind of forgot.
Right.
But after you were talking about it and stuff, I was like, oh yeah, I think
that does sound familiar.
When we first started talking about doing this series, you were like, I don't think I've actually read The Hobbit.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. My mom loves it. My mom was always a mega Lord of the Rings and Hobbit fan, but she didn't really read to us like that. But I think if she had, then I would have been introduced to it sooner.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
So the gospel principle that we chose to do for this book is it's so whimsical and childish too. Yes, I love it.
It's so perfect for the atmosphere of this book.
Yes.
Even. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Anyway. Sorry.
There's our drum roll. Now you're on the edge of your seat. It is home. Just simple and sweet. Home. So the Guide to the Scriptures defines home as, or I should say it should be, the center of gospel and family activities. So we're responsible for creating a Christ-centered home here on earth, paralleling our work toward our heavenly home in the eternities. President Uchtdorf said, I believe that every man, woman, and child has felt the call of heaven at some point in his or her life. Deep within us is a longing to somehow reach past the veil and embrace heavenly parents we once knew and cherished. So whether in this life or the next, home can be a precious place of peace and safety when we strive to center ourselves in Christ's teachings.
So, we're just going to get right into the story. I guess I should say spoilers. We always forget to say that at the beginning of our things. Hopefully, if you're listening, you've figured out that we go through all of everything that happens in the story. So
there will be spoilers.
If you are afraid of spoilers, do not listen. There will be some. So let's just jump right into it, like I said, with the very beginning. So in the very beginning, we are introduced to hobbits, actually, in general. In fact, the book starts off with one of the most iconic lines in literature. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. And it first describes the hole, that it's not a gross hole or a nasty hole. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. So we start off right away with this focus on home. It's talking about the hobbit hole and what Bilbo has particularly in his, how it's set up, how it feels, how it looks. And then we get into getting to know our main character, Bilbo Baggins, who, like I said, I just adore. I just love him. I don't even know why. He just has my heart. I freaking love him every time I see him. Maybe part of it is that Martin Freeman plays him in the films, and I love Martin Freeman, and I think he's perfect as Bilbo as well. So I just feel like it all just encapsulates this fabulous character that I just love. But I will say, even like listening to the audiobook the first time, I remember being like, oh, Bilbo is so cute. I love him. And I feel like people don't give him enough credit for how he deals with the ring and stuff. But We're not going to get into that right now. We'll probably talk about that a little later, but for now we won't. Anyway, so we meet Bilbo, and we're basically learning about how hobbits in general, and specifically Bilbo Baggins, are the type of people they don't want to be around the big folk, the big people. They keep to themselves. They're very just focused on their own comfort, on food and celebrations and their day-to-day farm labor. Like, it's very simple community, and they just enjoy the comforts of home, and Bilbo very much falls into that respectable hobbit mentality. However, his mother, we learn, is a took, and apparently the tooks are notorious for going on adventures, which is something most hobbits would never do and think is appalling. But he has some ancestry that have taken opportunities to go on adventures and have done amazing, incredible things. In fact, we read about Bilbo that although he looked and behaved exactly like a second edition of his solid and comfortable father, got something a bit queer in his makeup from the toque side, something that only waited for a chance to come out. The chance never arrived until Bilbo Baggins was grown up, about 50 years old or so, and living in the beautiful hobbit hole built by his father, which I have just described for you, until he had, in fact, apparently settled down immovably. So I love that he gets to this. I do love that it's an older character as well. Like, he's a middle-aged man, basically, who is very comfortable in his life, set in his ways, but there's like this dormant part of him almost that wants to come out, that he kind of showed more of as a child, and that was kind of driven out of him as he aged. And now he is who he is, but there is still this part of him that seeks adventure. And I think that's very symbolic of all of us. Like, as we get older, we lose that sense of wonderment. You mentioned that this book is written very much like childlike, almost, and whimsical, but like adults still love it because it's exploring that side of us that just wants adventure and excitement and loves the idea of being pulled from our comfortable life for a little while and then coming back to it later after we've learned so much and changed so much. And I think that's a really great place where we're starting to talk about home, where we're starting to explore this idea of leaving the home to come back to it. And the subtitle of this book, There and Back Again, also is very reflective of that. And we'll continue to talk about that as we go along. But we see that very much at the beginning of this opening the doors to this idea of home and what it means, especially within the context of leaving it.
Going off of what you said about changing so much, it's kind of where I was thinking about this here at the beginning, where Gandalf says at some point, I'm pretty sure he says it in the book, I just watched the movie and I know he says it in the movie, where he says that if he makes it back, he won't be the same hobbit that he was. And I just kind of, I don't know, I love that idea. And we have in the very first conversation where Bilbo meets Gandalf, kind of re-meets him. He knew him as a kid, but doesn't recognize him. And Gandalf is trying to get him to go on this adventure. Well, Gandalf says that he's looking for someone to go on the adventure. And Bilbo is like, no thanks, you might want to go somewhere else, bye. And Gandalf is like, actually, I think I'm gonna send you on it. And he says this line, he says, very amusing for me, very good for you.
Yes.
And I was like, why does that feel like such a God thing? Like, Gandalf knows it's gonna be amusing for him because he knows Bilbo's gonna struggle. Like, this is gonna be hard and it's gonna be kind of funny. And I just love, we see Bilbo change through much, and change happens usually through trials. He has to struggle and he has to go through trials, but in the end, it's good for him to leave this comfortable place where he has this respectable reputation and to go on this adventure that's really, really difficult. I'm going to start right off with a quote from the talk that I read in preparation for this, which was A Yearning for Home by President Uchtdorf in October 2017. Those who heed the inner call and seek God, those who pray, believe, and walk the path the Savior has prepared, even if they stumble along the path at times, receiving the consoling assurance that all things shall work together for their good. For God gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. And then he talks about how this will make our lives better and bring us joy and peace if we turn our souls to the light and begin our own wonderful journey home. It just ties together so beautifully with like, we're gonna stumble, but if we walk that path that's been prepared for us, then it works for our good and we make it back home even better and stronger than we were.
I love that, yeah. And I do love that line. I love the way Ian McKellen delivers it in the movie where he's like, yeah, I think it will be very good for you and very amusing for me. Yeah, I really like that. That's a good thought. And so not long after, I guess, his conversation with Gandalf, he ends up having that night several dwarves arrive at his door. There's one after the other. And none of them like are listening to him when he's like clearly confused or like, hey, what? This is my house. Like, I don't want you here. They're just like, yeah, we were invited, you're fine. And we see very quickly, like, he has in him this great care for other people, part of which comes from this level of respectability within his community that he's grown up in. But they know how to treat visitors, and they think that's very important, and he finds that very important. And we see that that doesn't change. This is one of the things that doesn't change with the journey, and I think it's because we're supposed to recognize that this is a positive thing about him. He says things like, or thinks things like, the cakes might run short, and concerned that even though he doesn't even know why these dwarves are here and they're just taking over his home, he's just like, oh, I should still make sure they're taken care of. Like, right. He has this very charitable heart. Even when he's confused, this instinct to love and to care and to take care of other people that really comes into play a lot throughout the rest of his journey, just in more and more intense ways. But he's already been prepared, basically, to help the dwarves on this journey, because the dwarves, that is not a strength of theirs, right. Is that recognition of respect for other people and caring for other people. They're very, I don't know if self-centered's the right word, more like just greedy and focused on that sort of, everything that's associated with that part of them, that greed and desire for riches and vengeance even at points, and having that as their focus, whereas Bilbo really is very simple and like, it's about other people, taking care of them, helping them get home as well.
That reminds me of a line in the movie that is not in the book, actually, that I really, really appreciated as an addition, where the dwarves are like really untrusting of Bilbo and like his reasons for being there, kind of. And Bilbo is finally like, you know, I miss my home. You're right. Like, I love my home and I belong there and I have a place where I belong and you guys don't. And so I'm here to help you achieve that because I care that you guys don't have that thing that is so important to me, you know, that I'm like dying to get back to it.
Yeah.
I love that kind of helping us see his character a little more the way that you just described it. And going back to that talk, Uchtdorf talks about how on this journey, it's not just about focusing on our own lives, right? If we're following the path that the Savior has for us, he says this path inevitably leads you to become a blessing in the lives of God's other children. And the interesting thing about the journey is that as you serve God and as you care for and help your fellow men, you will see great progress in your own life in ways you could never imagine. And I just love that. Then Uchtdorf goes on to say something that I think Bilbo really, really relates to.
Okay.
He says, perhaps you don't consider yourself all that useful. Perhaps you don't consider yourself a blessing in somebody's life, you know? And I think I think that I relate to it a lot too.
Right, yeah.
And that a lot of, everybody at some point, like, it's so easy to feel like, what in the world do I actually have to offer these people, you know? Bilbo's like, I'm a hobbit, guys. Yeah. I don't know how to do anything. Like, I can't fight. And you're like, you hired me to be a burglar, but I'm not a burglar either. Like, I don't...
It's like when you get a calling that you're like,
oh my gosh.
Yes, you called me to the work, but it's something that like I'm not qualified to do.
Yeah. And that's so, and it's so hard to remember sometimes that God qualifies us.
Yes.
And like he doesn't like qualify us in that moment. And so you're like, but is he though? Because I still don't feel qualified.
Right.
And so I just love that idea of, we think we might have to be more of something for God to use us as Uchtdorf again. More intelligent, more wealthy, more charismatic, more talented, more spiritual. But blessings will come not so much because of your abilities, but because of your choices. And the God of the universe will work within and through you, magnifying your humble efforts for his purposes. His work is always advanced on this important principle: out of small things proceedeth that which is great. And I just love that reminder, because we all know it, but like it's so few and far between moments that we actually like remember and really believe that. In my life, at least. I should say But yeah, so I just, Bilbo is more than willing to admit his humbleness. Like, he's like, I can't fight. I can't do any of this. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm here and I'm gonna do what I can. And actually, I just remembered that line from the book too. It's such a beautiful, beautiful line in the book. When Bilbo decides to go with them, he decides that it's the Took side, right, that wins out. Yes. And he's like, yeah, okay, I gotta go. This sounds so exciting. Once he decides to go, he's all back and forth. But then when he decides to go, he's like, I'm quite sure you have come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces on the doorstep, I had my doubts. But treat it as the right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of east and fight the wild wereworms in the last desert. And he's like, this whole time he's been like, what are these people doing here? And I don't know what's happening, and I'm not a part of this. And all of a sudden he's like, I have my doubts, but tell me what you want done and I'll do it. Yeah. Well, just go for it. I'll try it. Yeah. I love it. I love that attitude. So that was tangential, good. But there you go. That's all right.
No, I think that has a really important part of realizing that as we face the world outside of our homes, that feeling of being home can stay with us because of Christ. And it will make returning so much greater, particularly returning to our heavenly home or places where we're closer to our heavenly home, like the temple, like church, like within our own homes when we're inviting the Spirit to be there. We have something in us that is prepared and then is qualified by God to enable us to go and do it. And we just have to have faith in that. So backing up just slightly, just to explain for plot purposes what's going on. The dwarves come, they have this meal with Bilbo, and then they explain that their homeland, again, going with the theme of home, their home, the Lonely Mountain, was many years ago taken over by a dragon, and nobody's been able to return since, and they've also not heard from the dragon in many years. And so this set of 13 dwarves have joined together to try to get back into the Lonely Mountain, into their home, regain those riches, and also regain, again, their homeland. And Gandalf is helping them. He has a key and a map that they needed that he was able to get his hands on and give to Thorin, who's the leader of the company and is also the rightful heir to the throne of the Lonely Mountain. Like we said, Bilbo is definitely not sure at first. In fact, he pretty much vehemently says no.
He's like,
I do love in the movie you mentioned, like, that he is really unsure of his own abilities in this particular adventure. We see in the film and in the book a little bit too that the others are like, I don't know about him. He doesn't seem quite right. And Bilbo's just like, yeah, exactly. I'm not quite right. And Gandalf's like, y'all be quiet. I know what decision I'm making. I know that Bilbo's strong enough, and you guys are all going to figure that out, and he's going to figure out that he is needed on this quest. So anyway, so the next morning they get up and leave before Bilbo wakes up. Then Bilbo wakes up having decided not to go. But then he walks out and finds a note that's basically like, hey, we're down at the inn. We'll be there until this time. Just make sure you catch up with us. Like, the dwarves haven't computed that he said no. They're just expecting him to come. In the movie, it's played as more like they accepted his no and we're moving on. But I do think the films were trying to match the tone more of Lord of the Rings than the book of The Hobbit matches the tone of the books of Lord of the Rings, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it strikes a more serious and epic and intense tone than the book does, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just adds a different dimension to the story and things. And similar to, I would say, the Lord of the Rings adaptations, where it adds kind of a greater sense of character development for a lot of the characters, I think, which I really loved. So anyway,
it's one of the few times actually that I'm okay with movie changes. Most of the time I'm like, this is annoying and stupid.
Yes,
why are you changing
so
this?
unnecessary, but
like
yeah.
9.9 times out of 10. But this was one where Bilbo like leaves to join them, where I was like, okay, that was actually funny and cute and true enough that like I am okay with that little difference.
I'm going on an adventure. He just like realizes, he's like, wait a second, and
they're
just
gone, and he's like,
yeah,
no, I gotta go.
And the cut is great.
So
just
good
with the music and everything, and he's just running.
Yeah, and that's where we love Martin Freeman, where he's just so freaking cute.
Yes. Is he just running on an adventure? I'm going on an adventure.
Yes. Where in the book he's almost like just flummoxed into going.
Yes.
By Gandalf.
Gandalf just kind of confuses him into going.
Maybe part of why I like it is because I can relate to both of those things. The way that you just put it. I'm like, sometimes I feel like I'm just confused until where I'm like, okay, whatever. I just gotta roll with this because I won't be able to think straight until I do.
That is so true. When you're like talking to God and you're like trying to like logic your way through like what the heck he's doing with you, and you're like, I don't understand how what I'm seeing and experiencing is matching what I feel like is being revealed to me in the spirit.
Yeah.
But I guess like I'll go with it. Cool.
Whatever. Here I am.
Ultimately, I trust.
I'll just pack my
big
bag.
Like,
you take it over.
That
sounds
great. Yep. Honestly.
But then sometimes you're like, wait, no, don't leave me out. I'm coming. I'm doing it.
I'm gonna come. So anyway. Yes. Bilbo goes.
Bilbo.
This is gonna be a long episode.
Oh yeah, we knew that.
Just waffling on. But we do see that Bilbo still has the Hobbit in him very early on when he panics over not having his pocket handkerchief. It's just such a sad moment, the poor guy. And they're all like, okay, you'll be fine. Trust us. You'll be fine.
It's a moment of change, too.
Yes, it is. He's learning a little bit.
I was reading in front of Tori, and I was like, Tori, I love this line. I won't go back and try to find it, but when he's like, he was not the same Hobbit that he was before. He hadn't had a pocket handkerchief in ages. It's like halfway through the book, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm dead.
Right. The subtle, like, hints of the growth in a humorous way. Beautifully done. We love it. Anyway, so they go along their travels. This book has a lot of travel time. So we see paragraphs of describing them going along, and then eventually we get to this point where we have the famous trolls scene. This is probably one of the more popular, well-known scenes from The Hobbit, I would say. I think it's brought up in Lord of the Rings because Bilbo is telling the story to some little hobbits at one point. Anyway, but these trolls, long story short, they end up getting their hands on the dwarves, and Gandalf is away. He's off doing who knows what, being Gandalf. Oh yeah, they send Bilbo in first to go get some information or something, or to steal food. Is that what it is?
I think they're just sending him to like figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. In the movie, it's because the trolls have taken the ponies.
Yes.
And
which is
Bilbo,
the first moving things around that ruins everything.
Like, oh no. Anyway, so he goes in and he's looking and then ends up getting captured by these trolls. The dwarves come in to try to help him and also get captured. And it's a pretty unfortunate situation. I don't know how else to say it. Yes,
Everybody's
might say
captured.
that. Yep, everybody's captured and they're planning to eat them.
Bilbo, I love this because Gandalf tells everybody, like, one of the reasons that he wants Bilbo there is because hobbits are good at, like, sneaking around, and they kind of just tend to go unnoticed, which is the reason that the dwarves aren't paying attention to him.
Yes.
But Gandalf recognizes you guys get noticed, and he won't. And this is the first time that we see that, where the dwarves all get caught, and Bilbo's just kind of like, not. Yeah. They just don't notice him.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I love that, like, we see right away his, like, seeming weakness and uselessness, like, come into play as a strength that nobody expected.
Yeah, those weaknesses into strengths.
Imagine.
If you haven't listened to our episode on Sound of Music, we discussed that in depth on there, and you should check it out. It's a good combo. But anyway, yes.
And it's a good lesson, too. I'll just throw in a really fast lesson right here that I think we can learn from the dwarves side, too. I think it's really easy to not notice or look for all of the ways that other people can help aid in God's work. You know, it's easy to see people's weaknesses and be like, that person's weird or awkward, or her prayers are too long, or he makes annoying comments, or, you know, and focus on that stuff rather than what they can bring into everything. So there's my unrelated principle, but yes, I think really important.
I love that. In fact, not long after this, well, I guess with the trolls, I don't know if you have many other thoughts specifically with them. So just to run through the end of that scene, basically they end up buying enough time where Gandalf shows up and the sun rises and it turns the trolls into stone. They also end up going to the trolls' lair and finding weapons and things like that. So that's all great. And then they end up going to Rivendell, one of the homes of the elves. And so there we meet several different elves and they get some help with the map that they have. Some different things going on there. One thing that I do like as an add-in to the films is just seeing a little bit more about what Gandalf's doing just through all of this, because we just kind of hear about it later on or like hear little snippets. At this point they added in, and this isn't hinted at in the books, but it doesn't not make sense, where Gandalf's having like a meeting with Elrond and Saruman and Galadriel, the elvish queen lady. I don't even remember. Lady of the Forest woman.
Yeah.
So
something magical.
Yes, something magical. That is great. Anyway, but they have this council and the dwarves end up leaving while they're talking or whatever. And later Galadriel and Gandalf have a conversation. And Galadriel asks him why the halfling, why Bilbo Baggins. And Gandalf tells her that Saruman thinks that it is big, huge things that keep the darkness at bay, but really Gandalf believes it's the small things. It's everyday good deeds that keep the darkness from completely taking over. And I think to your point about being dismissive of other people and of ourselves and our own qualities really takes away from the fact that those little things are what are keeping Satan and his followers from completely taking over. It's every little good thing we do pushes them away a little bit more and makes it much harder for them to achieve their goals. And I just think that we need to value that, and especially as we continue with the Lord of the Rings series, that's such a central theme to everything, is these small individuals, seemingly insignificant, who end up making the biggest difference just by every step that they're taking on their journeys, by every selfless and caring and good action that they do, every time they think of home instead of thinking of greed, every time they think of those they love over vengeance or anything else that could lead them in a different path, like it does with a lot of the men and elves and dwarves within the story. That's what makes them successful in the end, are those small decisions.
Yeah, I mean, we even see, like, to go ahead just a little bit to Lord of the Rings, like, Saruman believes great power will quench evil, but then he obtains great power, but it's easier for, like, a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man, right? We see Saruman gain all of this power and then become corrupted.
Yes.
And then all of that power is used for evil, whereas Bilbo, like, you're not gonna get him to, like, care about anything other than his friends and his food. Like, you're just not going to. His kettle,
pocket handkerchief,
ham and eggs for breakfast. Right. Like, there are just certain things the man values, and they're not changing, and they're ultimately good things. Some more frivolous and unnecessary than others, but all coming from this place of love and compassion, like you were talking about. You know, he cares about his food and his comfort, and he shares that with people.
Yes.
And makes a difference in their lives. And so yeah, I think we totally see that point proven later on in the story of like, these are the great powerful people just cause problems. Yes. Mm-hmm. While these little people who are just, you know, trying to get back home and have the courage to ask that girl on a date. They're the ones who are making things happen.
Anyway, so after they get it, so they are taken care of in Rivendell for a little bit, get food, get more ponies, all of that jazz, and then they end up heading off into the mountains. And while there, they end up being caught in a thunder battle between storm giants in the mountains.
Love.
Very exciting. I love that whole description. Yeah.
Oh my god.
So well good. Done. We won't dwell too much on that because we have other things we need to talk about and
go read this beautiful book.
Yes, just read it. Anyway, so we get into this storm issue and they end up finding a cave that they go into to sleep and get some shelter from the storm. And while they're in there and sleeping, the floor ends up opening up and they just drop right in. I do actually, before we get into that, another addition to the movie. Again, it's a lot of more character expanding. And so we see Bilbo struggle a little bit more beyond just not feeling adequate. There's also this sense of he's homesick. Like you kind of mentioned earlier, another quote that happens, I think a little after this too, where Bilbo wants to go home and the dwarves also, especially Thorin, keep being like, you don't belong here, like just beating him over the head with these doubts he already has. They're just voicing them a lot. And so he's really struggling. And so we see him try to sneak away to try to go home. And he's stopped by Beaufort. And I gotta say, I love Beaufort in the movie. I just think he's the one who like does all the like funny things, like when he's like threatening with describing the dragon at the beginning and makes Bilbo pass out, or when he like throws the sausage at Bomber to make him fall off the table. Like he's such an iconic character that like the first time you watch it, you probably wouldn't notice him very much.
Right.
But like rewatching it, I've been like, I love him. He's so good. Anyway, so he has this conversation with Bilbo where Bilbo's like, you don't understand where I'm coming from because you don't have a home. And it's pretty brutal. And Beaufort's just like, no, you're right. We don't belong anywhere. And just like wishes him luck. And it's just really sweet just seeing this. And we're reminded that the dwarves aren't just fighting for these riches. They're also fighting for a place to belong and to feel at home. And where Bilbo is coming in as someone who really values that, he can understand where their need is, and that's what makes him stay, is recognizing that they don't have everything he does value, even if he doesn't value the gold and stuff. Anyway, so I just wanted to throw that in there because I really like that discussion in the film. But we do see the floor just kind of open up like a door and the goblins come in and take them. But in the book, it's a little different and a lot more goes on. I'm just going to sum up that Bilbo gets away at one point and kind of falls off.
He just doesn't really get noticed.
Yes.
And the goblins take all the dwarves away and Bilbo is just left behind.
Exactly. But he ends up in some sort of labyrinthine tunnels after all of this. And he's trying to figure out how to get out. And who should show up but our lovely Gollum. We all love Gollum. We love to kind of hate him, but also you can't really hate him because of just like...
He's so pitiable.
Yes, exactly. He's very pitiable.
Is it Andy Serkis in the Hobbit movies as well?
Yes, it's the same actor. He does such a good job too. Like you can't see Gollum any other way besides that with him.
It's just right.
It is just right. This episode has been divided into 2 parts. You have reached the end of part 1. Part 2 will be released the following Thursday. We hope you enjoyed the first half of our discussion. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at God and All Things Podcast. Additionally, if you are interested in seeing what Tori is currently reading, head over to her YouTube channel, Good Strong Words. Thank you again for listening. We hope you are having a wonderful day. Keep remembering to see God in all things, and we will see you next time. Bye!